the way that Kardec put together the Spiritist book, it's very intriguing. So when that's the way we imagine. He started elaborating all the questions and putting all together the answers that he has received from several places, from different mediums. The idea is that he had to start from the beginning, and the beginning is God.
It's very interesting. It's another sign that we have that Allan Kardec was beyond the ordinary intelligence when he formulated the first question of the Spirit's book, what is God, and not who is God. First and foremost, he is assuming that God is not a being, a human being.
Throughout the centuries, we have heard that we were created in God's image. But in reality, we're the ones who have created God in our image. We have projected our own imperfections onto God in an effort to understand this almighty being. For example, back in the days, we didn't understand the gravitational pull of the moon that exerts on Earth. As a result, when we saw the waves going back and forth, we thought there was a God pushing those waves back and forth. We didn't understand that the Earth spins on its own axis, and as a result, we didn't understand the forces of the wind. Then we concluded there was a God controlling the wind. We saw this fireball in the sky being raised in one side of the planet, and it would fall on the other side of the planet at nighttime. Once again, we concluded there was a God pulling this ball of fire across the sky. If I ask the question utilizing the word who, I'm already assuming that God must be a she or he, a human being of some sort. And by being a human being, we would also have all the imperfections of human beings.
We have no idea exactly what God is. How can we describe God? We know that God is not human beings, that God created human beings. So I think that in this sense is when Kardec poses this question, it already catches our attention to analyze in a deeper way the God itself, if we can say God itself, right?
But Allan Kardec, who was an educator by profession, he understood this very intricate problem of understanding the concept of God. So instead of asking the question, who is God? He asked the question by using what in the beginning of the sentence. Now, when he used the word what, it already implies that God cannot be a she or he, but a thing of its sort. It's not a he or she, but it. What is God? And that changes our entire concept of what is God, because it's not a human being, therefore it cannot have human passions. And it's interesting that the answer, it's not a definition of what is God, because our minds are very limited to understand God in its entirety.
The creature cannot understand fully the Creator. And they make an analogy, like a dog trying to understand the owner. It's impossible. So the distance between us and God will always remain a wave psychologically in terms of understanding, though we'll grasp more and more as we evolve, but we can never say completely, because evolution never ends, even though we reach the pure spirit level.
How can you explain to someone, for example, what is a laptop? Let's say we just go back 300 years, which is nothing when we compare it to the age of the earth. 300 years it's less than the blink of a second, and you're trying to explain to that individual what a laptop is, it becomes very hard, almost impossible. So the spirits who are in a way more advanced level than we find ourselves in have a very hard time explaining futuristic concept to us, because we still lack the materials, the language, and the comparisons in order to fully comprehend what they're trying to say.
Well, the spirits, the best way they had to define God to us is that God is the supreme intelligence of the universe, first cause of all things. So with that, they are describing what God represents, the supreme intelligence. There is no one like God. No one that has the same kind of intelligence as God. Even if we wanted to go along with certain traditions that we have in other religions, that goes with the seraphims, the cherubims, there is no one that is above God in terms of intelligence, in terms of knowledge. And God is the first cause of all things, meaning that He is actually the creator of all things. So this is the way the spirits manage to, using the limitation of our vocabulary, to try to explain to us what God is.
We would say that first, the beginning, God. That's the name. Whatever we name the first, the cause, the first cause, is named God. It's a matter of terminology, of vocabulary. We name it God. Other religions name it Allah, Jehovah. Whatever the name is for this supreme intelligence, first cause of all things. God is a non-created intelligence, not a being. It's a non-created intelligence, the supreme of all.
But the thing is, it doesn't mean what name we are going to refer to the creator. It's the creator. It is the supreme intelligence, the first cause of all things. So we should not pay that much attention to the particular names certain religions or philosophies are going to give to this creator, because this can put us apart, can vary, the point of view we have of God. We have to think about God as a creator.
When we ask the question whether or not God is, there are many gods, as if each one would represent one attribute of perfection. It doesn't make sense. Because as we say, the body has one head. And we need one head to command the whole body, one brain. But 2 hands, 2 arms, 2 feet, 2 ears, 2 eyes. But we have one head, one nervous system, one brain. The same for everything in nature. There's one command, there's one intelligence, one and only. It can't be spread out. It doesn't make any sense.
And one thing, especially, for us, being from other countries as well, we speak in different languages. We have several translations for the word God, right? So this is not it's not the word. Because I can say God, Deus, Dieu. It's the same thing with different words. So the wording may vary, but it's the same essence.
What we understand is that our people on the different levels of understanding the natural laws. And the concept that they have of God is very different concept that we Spiritists have of God.
But you may be asking, what is it then that the mythology and in the ancient civilizations, and some of them still carry it to date in other formats, as we say, the Catholic Church, etc., the belief that God is present in different forms, different beings. What are they? They are actual creations of God, creatures of God, that have already elevated themselves, and they already easily show, portray features that are divine, that makes us feel like Jesus. Many people look at Jesus in some religions thinking that Jesus is God.
Catholics believe that Jesus himself is God.
In terms of Spiritism, we don't see God and Jesus as being one and the same. We see Jesus as being the Son of God, like we all are, because like we were saying before, we were all created by God. And if you are created by God, you are a child of God. So Jesus is definitely a child of God.
Now, Jesus did not mention in any part of the scripture that he was God himself. If one pays close attention to Jesus saying, he kept saying all the time, the one who sent me to do this, the one who told me to tell you this. He is referring to someone who sent him. So if you will argue with a Catholic about who is God, they would say that Jesus is God in flesh. Now, we don't believe in such thing. We understand that Jesus is a highly evolved spirit who came to bring us a message of love, and most importantly, to teach us how to live love.
The difference from us to Jesus is that Jesus has already attained such a high level of perfection that we have not.
We understand that Jesus is a highly evolved spirit, but not God himself. Jesus said that so many times.
So he is a special child in the sense, child of God in the sense, because Jesus can already understand God, can already be and represent God. So Jesus, when Jesus was here, he was the representative of God. He was the voice of God to us. And perhaps this is what made people, try to put them as being one and the same. Because Jesus was 100% here all the time, being actually the voice of God.
Because he's already so connected, as he said, the Father and I are one. So of course, when we feel that we are that close to Jesus, he's our God. Because he's already so transparent, he allows God to flow through him to the point we feel God's presence, but we know he's also a creature of God.
But the thing is, we as spirits created by God, we have the same possibility. And when we say that, in no way we are taking out from Jesus the respect and even the veneration that we have towards Jesus, because he is a special spirit, he is a special being, and he had to have so much love for us to come to us in those stages of humanity to try to be to us the way to truth and life. I think that another way that we can try to see God, and that the spirits actually advise us, is to look at the creation, to look at everything that is around us. And by looking around, by looking at the works, the result of the work of God, we can then have an idea of what God is. When we start looking and studying the cosmos, for instance, and the harmony that exists, it's something that is not there just by chance. You cannot imagine that it's there just by chance. So the best way, I think, it's for us to be content with what we understand now, and actually even trusting the point of view of scientists, because the scientists, many of them are the ones that are saying that.
What we learn from today's science is that we had, for the beginning of all things, a Big Bang. But the concept of the Big Bang is that everything started from the Big Bang. But it begs the question, what was before the Big Bang? What was there before to create the initial particles to begin with? What we learn from science itself is that there are no effect without a cause. So for us to blindly accept the concept of the Big Bang, we must also go against a basic concept of science. There is no effect without a cause. If I accept blindly the concept of the Big Bang, I am assuming that nothingness was able to create something. And that's not possible. And there are so many unknowns in the concept of the Big Bang that scientists are really taking a leap of faith because they're still searching for the data. And there are so many coincidences that maintains the universe as it is, that once again, that gives us evidence of a designer in the whole concept of the universe.
I remember a while back I read in a, I always like to read this scientific magazines, and they were talking about exactly that. I mean, the precision of the position of certain bodies in the sky, like, the planets, stars, and etc. And they were explaining that if there was a tiny fraction of movement in those positions, that would bring chaos and destruction of all the orbs that were around. I heard once that it's very interesting for us to try to attribute everything to the work of chance. It's like us picking up like 1,000 pieces puzzles, throwing to the air and wishing that it's going to form just before our eyes when it falls to the floor. So it doesn't make any sense.
Let's just say that the rate of the expansion of the universe was just a little bit slower or a little bit faster. The universe as it is couldn't exist. And then we have universal constants. These are numbers in nature that in order for the universe to exist as it is, these universal constants, they need to work with one another. Let's say that gravity changes just a little bit, and by gravity changing just a little bit, it couldn't make possible for the universe to exist as it is. We have the strong force, the weak forces. If they change just a little, the universe as it is couldn't exist. This concept is called fine-tuning, that the constants need to work together in order to make the universe possible. This is one of the strongest evidence of a being, creating and maintaining the universe. So when the astrophysicists found these different constants working together in order to make the universe possible, because some of them are blindly atheists, and we say this with all the respect, in order to solve this conundrum, they created, and this is a creation out of thin air, the concept of multiple universes. What that means is there are an infinite number of the universe. And we happened to be in the universe that by chance has the correct amount, and they are rightly adjusts these universe constants to make our universe possible for life. And the other universes, they don't have any life, and some might have, but this is pure chance. Now, chance, it's not intelligent as Allan Kardec used to say. But even if there are multiple universes, once again, it begs the question, who or what created all the other universes for this one by chance to be possible? So we're always running to this question.
Science has a hard time investigating God because it's not the object of science. Science, the main object of the studies of science are the material world. So it's not in the scope. But naturally, some scientists have been paying attention to it, though they are not believers.
And I fully understand why astrophysicists and some scientists are atheists. For one, those who call themselves religious, they are trying to defend an idea of God that it's really against logic and common sense. Obviously, Spiritism does not defend this idea, this concept of God. A white man with a long beard sitting up on the clouds, dictating our lives. That's not the God we're saying that exists. What we are defending is the idea of the God of Spinoza, the God of Albert Einstein, a supreme intelligence of the universe, the first cause of all things.
It's very difficult for us to understand without reasoning. That's why the spirits, in the Spirit's book, they give us a tip through Kardec's questions. They say, we're at a level that we need to first feel God, and then we will naturally, as we evolve, be able to expand consciousness and expand our understanding through the reasoning. At this point, we need to feel. And then Kardec very wisely asked, how can we do it? Contemplating nature. But let's not forget, we're nature too. So when we do the inner journey, we're contemplating that nature. As Kardec gives that beautiful analogy, when I'm contemplating a picture, I can tell by the contemplation the attributes of the painter.
And it starts from us. I mean, when we think, I remember a few years ago we had here in New York City an exhibition of was called The Body, where you could go and see a lot of, see the human body and different sections, different parts, the organs, the whole body, arteries, everything. I remember that I had friends that didn't want to see that because they were going to get too impressed. But I was one that, I really wanted to go and see. And it's so amazing when we look inside our physical body and you think, I mean, the arteries intertwining with everything else, and it looked like a mess, but it's not a mess, and you think, how can this work? How I mean, it's so amazing when we think about ourselves, even when you think about, now, for those of you that are watching this, I mean, you're using your eyesight, but what sees is not our eyes, it's not our eyes, it's our brain. So it's not this that is seen, but the brain. It's amazing when we think about that, about all these possibilities. So we don't have to go far to be marveled, to be in awe with God's creation. We are God's creation, and just by looking at us and by looking at the possibilities that we have as spirits, it's something that should make an impact in all of us.
So when I learn to love myself, for example, some people say, but it's so hard, I don't deserve, I can't be lovable. But if I don't, the major thing I'm telling, if I don't appreciate and I don't accept myself, it's as if unconsciously I'm telling my Creator, you created trash. So, in reality, the lack of self-love is equal to non-worship in regards to God. I'm lacking that element. No worship, no surrender to the one that not only created, but sustains life as we speak.
We were definitely created out of love. As far as we can understand, the breath of life is love. And God is actually the being, the supreme being that is capable of generating a love in a way that we still do not know.
Dr. Andrew Newberg, he used to work at Penn State University and now he's at Thomas Jefferson University in Pennsylvania. He created a new field in science. Till then, a few years ago, till then nobody officially investigated that. He tries to study neurotheology. He coined the term. Neurotheology, it's the study of God and its effects in our brain. He created the study through imaging of the brain to the point that he first shows to us in published papers that when we think of God, specific areas light up in our brain. If you are reading a book that talks about God, that has religious connotation, it will light up in different areas. And if you have sacred images in front of you, areas of the brain will be activated. And it's interesting because you activate areas that are more primitive, phylogenetically speaking, when you need objects to feel God. The more we transcend our feeling of God without the need of any exterior motivation, we activate higher cortical areas of the brain, telling us that when we think of God, when we feel God, we are changing even the neurochemistry of our physical body.
We have to use reason to analyze things, but there are things that are so much beyond our grasp that we cannot rationalize. And sometimes I think we may have even answers about God from children than actually from adults, because we try so much, we use so much the words to describe, as opposed to children that we just say, well, God is.
It's so interesting that Kardec, in the Spiritist book, first part, he talks about the attributes of God. But Kardec is so humble, and he tells us, and the Spirits confirm, we cannot dare to encapsulate God in these few attributes. Because if we do, we are attempting to do something which is impossible.
We can understand some attributes of God, but not God itself. Reason being, it's because we lack material of comparison in order to understand what God is. Our language is still very limited to describe something that yet we have nothing to compare with.
The distance between us and God will always remain a way psychologically in terms of understanding, though we'll grasp more and more as we evolve, but we can never say completely because evolution never ends. Even though we reach the pure spirit level, we still have the infinite, and it's hard to grasp. But God's attributes, some of God's attributes that we can talk about, first of all, immutable. God doesn't change. God is and will be, and the laws that God creates do not change because God is unchangeable, immutable.
André Luiz, in order to help us to understand, he said to his medium, Chico Xavier, that God is to us what the ocean is to the fishes. We are immersed in God. We are in God because God is everywhere. Since God is not a human being, there is no need for it to be circumscribed in a specific place. Therefore, God is everywhere.
That's the idea that we have, that God is infinite. Everything else is not. So God is one of the attributes would be exactly that, infinite, eternal. So there was not a beginning or an end to God. For us, there was a beginning, and but there will not be an end because we are immortal, as being the creations of God. But that's the idea that we have in Spiritism, that God was not created. So how can we understand that, right? Immortality is hard enough for us to understand, right? So
Just. That's a hard one. It's a hard one to understand because when life doesn't go to the direction we understand, we think, where's God's justice? But God is just because God is love.
And since we cannot imagine God resting, because that would mean God got tired to begin with, if there's a need to rest, we can also conclude that God always created. God is constantly creating. The universe is constantly changing per se.
God is good. God never created evil, only created goodness. But the Supreme Intelligence is so interesting that it creates things with the potential of unfolding with room for choice when we reach the human kingdom. And in that point, we don't understand the balance of just and good. Merciful. How can you be just and merciful at the same time? It's a balance that we are yet to understand. And in Jesus' steps, we have glimpses of what it is to be just and merciful.
we are a result of love. So being a result of love, of course, the idea of God will never be to punish us. I mean, if today many psychologists that deals with children education, they tell us the disadvantages of punishing our children. How, I mean, nowadays, this is one thing that we talk about. Of course, in our parents' generation, that was not an issue, but today, even words that can lower their motivation. So it's always the opposite.
This unconditional love does not depend, as it says, on any condition. So I don't need to change anything because God's gonna either punish me or reward me, but because I am in alignment with God. And so I improve myself. I allow the divine seed to blossom.
It's not by punishing us that we are going to learn things. It's not by diminishing us that we are going to learn things, but we will have experiences, we will have situations in our lives that will actually serve as lessons to us.
I actually don't think when we say improve myself really tells the story, because in a way it tells us that God didn't know how to create us well. You know, when we say we're imperfect, it's not that we are imperfect, we are perfectible. We are blossoming in our qualities, in our essential divine qualities.
There are some people that try to define, you know, some theories actually that try to make a point that we are all part of God.
It's interesting because in the Spirit's book, in the first chapter of part 1, Kardec deals with that question of what we call pantheism. And this first part is divided in 4. subdivided in 4 groups. First, the definition of God, then the attributes of God, the proofs of God's existence, and finally, the final question, are we part of it all?
In a poetic way, we could say yes, that we are part of God. Aren't kids part of us as well? So in a poetic way, we might say that yes, we are part of God because we are created by God. But we cannot mix this idea with the concept that us collectively make up God, which is an idea that permeated the philosophical world for centuries. People thought that each one of us combined together made up God.
We are part of God because we come from God, but not in physicality. And we cannot say, like they say as well, some of these theories, that when you think about, us being part of God, the idea that we will have is that if we put everyone together, then we'll have God. And they say no, even if you put all of everyone, in this planet, almost 8 billion together, it is still not God.
We are created by God, but we don't make up God by being all together.
Spirits are so wise and go with the logics of life. We can't be part of God in the literal sense of the word, because if we were, God would be changeable, and God is immutable. That's one of the attributes of God, let's say this way. So we can't be part of God, but we are umbilically connected to God.
So we come from God, we were created from God, but we are not part of God, but God is part of us. God is within us. It's our creator. I don't know how better to try to define that.
I remember Raul Teixeira, one of the scholars of Spiritism in Brazil, giving a talk here at the Spiritist Center Virginia years ago, and he said, a beautiful analogy, our connection with God is umbilical. So let's visualize this cord between God and us, feeding us. But we have free will, and with our own hands, with each action, word, and feeling, and thought, we can constrict the nourishment, the nutrients that are coming from God, and that's when we get sick. That's when we become weaker. So we cannot say that we are part of God, but we are constantly connected to God.
What's very important for us to realize is that belief in what God is, it's really not crucial for our human behavior. What is crucial to understand is that we have the ability to be God ourselves. We have the ability to create our own world, because the definition of God is able to create. So in that sense, we are gods ourselves. We can create our future with today's reality. We have the opportunity, we have the skills, we have the intelligence to shape our lives. So in that understanding, we are God ourselves. And we suggest that by having this opportunity, make the best of your life and create an awesome future for you. Because at the end, you're the sole responsible for your own destiny.
It's interesting because planet Earth, different from other planets, is going through this transition from a planet that still has the lack of good more evident, and this constant search for the blossoming of good in humanity. And many people ask, how can we prove that God exists if we are going through all of this? When you see children being born with problems, and people who seem to be so good and loving, like Chico Xavier, becoming sick and ill, because we have this expectation that when you do everything right, you're not going to suffer anymore. But then, when Kardec asked about the proof of God, the Spirit's answer, for every cause there is an effect. In our own existence, we have a cause, and in our own experiences, we have also the same law being applied, which came from God. For everything we do, there is an effect. So, within the understanding that God is the cause, we also understand that everything in our lives also has a cause, because we are the children of the very Creator. And all the masters of humanity say something that Jesus exemplified: we will feel God closer to us in the most extreme moments of our lives. It's paradoxical, but it's the most consoling part of it all.
There is this saying that I do believe in the God that created man, not in the God that man created. Which is, I think, the basic difference for us is actually that, it's two totally different beings. The idea, the image that we have of God from what God really is and how He created us. I'm referring to God as He, but it is not.